Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Just As I Am podcast. It is your favorite bestie, Nicole, and today it's been a long time coming, but we are finally going to talk about one of the biggest stories in the Old Testament. We are going to be talking about Job, so stay tuned. So, a few weeks ago, I got on my Facebook page and made a poll to see what y'all might want the next podcast episode to be, what you want me to talk about, go over, discuss. And side note, if you haven't already, you should go to Facebook and follow my page so you can keep up and put in your 2 cents, and it'll be great and fabulous. The name is Just As I Am. I think the name you can type in the search bar is Just As I Am Facebook. But surely to goodness, if you just type in Just As I Am, you'll find it. So I listed a few of them. I listed Joshua, Job, Jacob, and Esau. I don't know why I picked all of these J names, but it's fine. And Job was the top pick. And I was like, great, fine, dandy. And then I realized the book of Job has 42 chapters. It is very long. And these chapters are not short in the slightest. They are also very long. So we are going to break this into 2 different episodes, 2 different parts. We are going to go over chapter 1 through 21, and then next time we're going to go over I keep saying that, my goodness, chapter 22 through 42, right? Is that the right math? Anyways, I don't know. So, something to know is Job was definitely a guy who had it all, then he didn't, and then he had it all times a million. Or a lot. A very big amount. One thing to know about Job's story is that it is actually assumed to be written in the time of Moses, which may seem a little strange because Exodus or Numbers even was 10 or so books before this. But everything is the way it is for a reason. You can think of it this way. Job had his whole thing going on, 42 chapters worth, and that would just seem a little out of place if you slapped it right in the Israelite story going to the Promised Land. So, anyways, something else to know is that in this time period, wealth was measured by belongings or possessions, such as livestock or servants. So let's get on with it, shall we? If you read chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, it's the intro, obviously, but God is there and they give an intro to Job. They kind of talk about him a little bit, and we move on and we see that God is there. And the sons of thunder join him. That's not true. The sons of God join him, obviously. But guess who tags along? It's Satan. Satan tags along. And God asks him, what are you even doing here? And this is where it gets a little bit crazy. And we're only on verse 8. God asks Satan about Job. Then he speaks of Job and talks about how he is one of a kind and has integrity and fears God, and he turns away from evil. Top tier. Okay, this is, you know, I hope that God says the same things about you and me, because if he said that to my face, I would, well, first of all, be speechless. I'd probably also be terrified, but that's a story for another time. And one thing I want you to remember about this whole conversation is that God is the one who brought Job up. Satan said absolutely nothing about Job. So it doesn't sound nice, but technically God kind of threw Job under the bus. But as the story unfolds, we can see why. So Satan responds, "Didn't you put a hedge of protection around him and such? Because if you took all of that away, he would curse you. Definitely. As the children say, no cap. Cursed." At this point, God is like, bet, and hands over jurisdiction over Job. But you can't personally touch him. That is his only rule. Now, Job at this time is hanging out with his kids when one by one a servant messenger person tells Job of a tragedy that occurred. And then it was about 4 people, one after one, who came to do this. Another one came before the first one was even done bringing the news. And they all bring a different message. So after all of these messengers have come, he's lost flocks, he's lost servants, he's lost his children. It just keeps going and going and going. It's like a domino effect, or Jenga. I don't know, whatever you want to say. So I'm going to show my age here, but remember a few years ago when Brittany shaved her head and we had to refer to that? Well, we didn't have to, but we do. Refer to that moment usually saying, "We're going to pull a Brittany." Just me? Okay. Well, Job tore his robe and shaved his head and fell to his knees, but instead of having a come apart like most of us would, he worshipped. Job fell to his knees. Praise the Lord. In this moment, it feels like he thinks he's next, because God says, oh my goodness. Job says, "I entered naked and I'm leaving naked." God gives, he takes. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job is so iconic because I knew at least 90% of the Christian community has heard this phrase. Even if it's not a Christian, I'm sure they've heard this phrase. Yet, not once when all of this was going on did he sin or blame God. Never, nada, not once. Now, in chapter 2, Satan comes around, and it's round 2 again. Satan comes back, same as before. This time, God has a neener kind of come back and tells him nothing of Job has changed. So Satan took that jurisdiction, took everything from Job, but it hasn't taken away his integrity. It hasn't taken away how he steers clear of evil. Nothing. He's the same Job as he was before. So Satan says, skin for skin, and gives his 2 cents, okay? God says, go ahead. just don't kill him. Okay? So Satan goes and causes boils all over Job. Head to toe. I mean, every square inch. Job's wife comes into the picture now, okay? She comes in and is far from being a supportive wife. We are not Team Job's wife at this moment. She comes in and she basically just tells him to just curse God and die. Good going, sis. We love a supportive sister. Job tells her what she said is foolish, and why should we only accept what is good? That honestly is a valid statement. Nice going, Job. So now we're at the point in the story where 3 of Job's buddies show up. Okay? Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They have heard about what's been going on with Job and have come to see him. They meet up with Job to sympathize and comfort him. And when they get there, they could barely recognize Job. So, what do they do when they get there? They weep, they tear their robes, they're throwing dust on their heads. Each man stayed with him for 7 days and 7 nights, but no one said a word because of his suffering. So Job finally breaks his silence with a speech, which you can read in chapter 3. But to simplify it, it is about Job cursing the day he was born, and there is a lot of resentment towards that day. In chapter 4 and 5, Eliphaz has his turn and tells Job that he is just exhausted from the situation. But although God wounds you, he also bandages you. Now, I want to put a quick side note before we really get into all of these speeches. I am not a biblical scholar by any means. So what you hear me talk about is my interpretation of what I read. So if you want more information or a more biblical understanding, philosophical, whatever you want to call it, I would definitely go to your pastor. But I am going to tell you my interpretation from reading these. So in chapter 6 and 7, Job responds to Eliphaz. He says that his grief cannot be weighed. If God crushed him, it would have still brought him comfort. What a wild thing to say. He also mentions just having loyalty from friends. That's what he wants. That would be nice right now. So now, the second friend, Bildad, takes his turn in chapter 8. And he seems to try and bring some positivity. Job replies in chapter 9. He starts by agreeing, but then he goes into all of the miraculous things that God can do. But at the end of 9 and starting in 10, he goes on again about God just ending him. He's questioning his life once more. And so now we're on to chapter 11, and it begins with Zophar, the third friend, having his turn to speak. And when he begins, he's kind of condoning Job's attitude and then fades into asking, maybe more suggesting, that he redirect his heart and remove his inequity, because this is what would happen. It really seems uplifting and encouraging, but Job didn't quite feel that way about it. And we find that in chapter 12 when Job replies and basically says he feels like a laughing stock. Raise your hand if you've ever felt like a laughing stock before. Everyone could at least raise a few fingers. The one who is righteous and blameless, but yet he is a laughing stock. That's who Job is and how he feels right now. Wisdom and strength belong to God, and no one can rebuild what he tears down. Job is accepting of all of this and says to bring on all that there will be. So Job is like, there's a purpose for all of this. Keep it coming if it must. And this goes until chapter 15. And so the second series of speeches begin. They were quiet for 7 days and 7 nights, so they have a lot to say at this point. Starting once again with Eliphaz, and it seems that he's pointing fingers and saying Job did this all to himself. Towards the end, he's basically saying all of the things he hopes will happen. In chapter 16, Job replies, and he's just fed up and over it at this point. You are miserable comforters. Miserable comforters. Have you ever just felt down in the dumps and the people who try to make you feel better suck? They're absolutely, terribly no good, very bad. Well, this is how Job feels about his friends right now. So he does not feel very good about his friend's choice. And as he said, you're miserable comforters. Is there no end to your empty words? Do people just talk and you're just thinking to yourself, be quiet? Well, that's how Job is feeling right now. I feel that Job, he's done hearing what they have to say to him because it's not beneficial to him. Job then responds with what he would be telling his friends if they were in his place. What he would tell them would be encouraging, right? He would bring relief to his friends as a good friend would do. And as chapter 17 ends, Job is wondering where his hope is. Does anyone see hope for Job? Well, Job doesn't see it, but we can. We got your back, dude. And as chapter 18 begins with Bildad's second speech, and it does not start off with kind words. He seems to have gotten butthurt, basically, about Job's responses to them. And this goes on for 21 verses, closing with Bildad, to me, sounding very sarcastic. In verse 21, he says, "Indeed, such a dwelling of an unjust man. And this is the place of the one who does not know God." How do we feel about that? But as usual, in verse 19, Job is still unfazed. Amazing. What a king. And asks them, when are you going to stop bullying me? Even if I did do something wrong, that's none of your business. That is between me and God. You keep your nose out of it. He is just feeling attacked at every angle. His friends are doing a very terrible job. Well, Job speaks of how the ones who loved him now despise him. His servants don't listen to him anymore, and how he is just flesh and bones, because at this point it's literally he is skin and bones. And towards the end of chapter 19, though Job gets a little positive in verse 25, that is well known. Do you know what it is? You will when I start saying it. But I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the end he will stand on the dust. Oh, what's her name? Not Nicole Nordman. What's the other one? Anyways, she sings about how her Redeemer lives, and we love it so much. So now in chapter 20, it is Zophar's second go around, and Zophar seems to be saying all of these things that will happen to someone who enjoys doing evil and continues to do evil things. Once again, pointing fingers. Job lays it down flat, smooth as can be, and says, "Let me speak, and when I am done, then you may continue your mocking." Whoa. Let me speak, and you may not speak until I'm done. Because I know you're just going to keep saying all good things to me, and that's just not right. Not fair. So now Job is making his case here, and he makes a pretty good case. He asks, well, why do wicked people live their best lives when their money with their money and their houses? They never have any livestock troubles. They live a good life and are cared for to the grave. They live their evil ways. They have no fears, no worries. And then I believe it's Sheol, is that? Because at this point in time, heaven and hell were not a thing. So that was where they thought they would go. And Job is saying, these people don't do anything good, and yet nothing bad ever happens to them, and they are fine and dandy and can peacefully go to Sheol when they're done. He tells them, your comfort sucks and it's deceptive. See, I get in trouble because I don't have a filter a lot. But, I mean, he doesn't have to. I feel like he has the right not to. But Job sure doesn't have a filter, and it feels so good. So, we are now to the halfway point in the book of Job, and we'll continue to finish in part 2. Hopefully I will have it next week. I'm going to do my best. So I'll see you then.